morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Griffiths, and I was asked to talk about new domains for research. And so I'm going to briefly touch on some of the domains which may be new for some of you. For some of the rest of you, it may be still au courant, but then we'll talk a little bit about some of the other ones. I am going to spice this up with a little recent data that just came in last week, which should make life more interesting. One of the things that was very clear from the Lancet 2013 series was, people were talking about, well, we can deal with 20% of stunting in the world through nutrition interventions, leaving the question, what about the other 80%? What's going on? How are we going to deal with this big gap that's there? And so this central slide there about environmental confounders is, I think, an important one because there's an interaction for people in the environment that they live in, etc., and things that we have identified, as have others, have been the importance of water and sanitation, or WASH, mycotoxins such as aflatoxins in the food supply, as well as the human biome. And when you think about what some of these environmental confounders are, including bioavailability of food, by the way, these are really important ones. And so some of the ones that some of you are familiar with are this condition called environmental enteropathy. People who live in contaminated environments, mostly around the tropics, end up with an inflamed intestine which is unable to absorb food and also lets stuff that's supposed to stay within the intestinal tract get into people, and so it becomes inflamed. And children basically spend some of their metabolic reservoirs and energy trying to resolve this, and they try to contain this semi-infected intestine. And when they do that, then they don't grow as well. Basically, they're using energy in that direction. So we are undertaking studies in environmental enteropathy, for example, in our cohort study that's going on in Uganda. The gut microbiome has received a huge amount of attention. Both the spectrum of bacteria which live within your intestines is called the microbiota, and all of their functions are called the microbiome. And both in obese people and in people who are underweight, their microbiomes are abnormal. And what we have recently learned is that the microbiomes of children who are undernourished actually actively contributes to their undernutrition. Actively contributes to it. So these bacteria are not good for you. They are bad. So you hear ideas going around on the web and everything about, like, we should be treating children with antibiotics blindly all throughout the world. This is bad for antibiotic resistance. We should be coming up with probably a clean environment where children not only don't have enteropathy, they don't have contact with these pathogenic bacteria, which then colonize them. And so we have lots of questions that have to do with around the microbiome, and we hope to be addressing those as well. The third one that's on this list is aflatoxins. I think many of you are familiar with this issue. Aflatoxins are a specific class of mycotoxins which are made by fungi, and they do nasty things to you. They're known to be potent carcinogens, and there's a lot of evidence that they also affect child growth. And so there's major efforts being made to reduce the amount of mycotoxin and specifically aflatoxin exposure that people get through their diets. And so basically what happens is you get fungusy food. You harvest food and you don't dry it down to 8% residual moisture, and it gets fungusy and it gets disgusting and blah blah blah. Or maybe it doesn't look that bad and you still eat it. And when you look at populations in the 34 target countries that the Lancet identified, in 31 of the 34 I've been able to find evidence that there has been mycotoxin contamination. So when we think about what's going on with a child has a unhealthy intestinal microbiome. They have a leaky intestine because of the environmental enteropathy. They're probably getting mycotoxins in their food, as well as exposure to animal and human pathogens because of the environments they live in. They live in a farm community. They don't have any good sanitation. They don't have water. So this is what happens. So if you're going to be trying to address their nutritional status through nutritional interventions, you have a lot going against you. And so what you want to do is try and prevent those other factors from being important. And you want to have a normal kid who can grow, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I just want to briefly mention some exciting data that we got just last week. This is in collaboration with our colleagues at the Peanut and Mycotoxin Innovation Lab, and I'd like to thank USAID East Africa for funding this particular work. But we had someone that we've been supporting, Barnabas Ntamba, who ran a cohort in northern Uganda, and these are some of the findings. That aflatoxin levels measured during pregnancy adversely affect weight gain in pregnancy. Like, that's bad. You want women to gain weight, and it's pretty dramatic, actually, the difference in terms of weight gain. And secondly, a really completely out of the blue, shocking finding was that individuals with HIV, and these are women on treatment, have much higher levels of aflatoxin, more than 10 times higher than the women who didn't have HIV. Their diet's not different, but their metabolism may be of aflatoxins or things like that. We can find no evidence that their diet is different. And the third thing is basically that the children who are exposed to higher levels of aflatoxins indeed has been shown in cross-sectional but not prospective studies. Those children are smaller, their HIV scores are lower. This graph just shows you dramatically at 1 month of age. This is the HAZ score of a child born to a woman who is HIV negative with low aflatoxin exposure, but this is someone who's got high aflatoxin exposure. That's a significant difference. Then you look at HIV. Now this is a woman who is on treatment. Look at the difference in the HAZ status of her child. And then if you add the two of them together, HIV and aflatoxin, you can see that women with HIV in the highest quartile of exposure are very dramatically different in terms of the HAZ status of their child, in terms of the stunting status. So there's something going on here. This is unexplained. Nobody's ever shown this in pregnancy before, nor in weight gain. So this is something brand new. Oh, these are the levels. How's that? You think those are different? Wow. How about that? So when we talk about aflatoxin control, for example, it may be that we need to target this to a population such as pregnant women and also be looking at individuals who are in HIV therapy or have HIV in terms of what's going on. Let me just skip this. So what I want to say is that when we think about what's out there, we're going to be focused, as we have been, on these environmental confounders. But we are finding that there are unexpected things that we find because of the breadth of the view that we have. I want the nutrition lab to get the credit for the breadth of view that it has. So because we're actually measuring malaria and not using some other proxy measure, we found a relationship between cattle and malaria. We have just found something which looks like some kind of interaction between HIV and aflatoxin, in pregnancy especially. So these are the things that we're finding popping out of this because of the, again, breadth of what we're doing. What are emerging domains? Clearly, household and individual resilience is terribly important. All of us are aware of the tragedy in Nepal with the recurrent earthquakes, but earthquakes are large events. Sometimes there are chronic emergencies that go on. There are people who live under circumstances where having resilience is not a single event, but actually their daily existence. And so that's something which may be terribly important for us to be looking at. When we look at water quality, we're actually doing water quality measurements in our studies. We're actually looking at the number of bacteria. We're not doing this, improved or unimproved water type junk, but we're actually looking at the number of bacteria. And one of the things that I think that many of you are aware of is that there are heavy metals in water in Southeast Asia, especially arsenic. And there's pretty good data that affects the birth weight of children and their subsequent outcomes. Death rates are higher in infants in mothers who ingested more arsenic. So mortality is higher in children. So when we look at water quality, we need to look probably not only at pathogens, but also at chemical contaminants as well. And then the last thing that I'm going to mention, at least for the moment, is cognition. And it's very interesting. Cognition is one of these things that we've looked at in terms of micronutrients like iodine and iron, but we haven't really looked at dietary patterns. And there's a lot of work that went on historically within developed countries through the 60s and 70s, for example, and earlier than that in terms of dietary diversity and in terms of adequacy of diet, micronutrients and specific micronutrients. But when we look at the Feed the Future countries and we look at what's going on there in their modern context, we really have very little idea about this. One of the things that we talk a lot about is stunting. But a stunted child who is this tall also has a head which is smaller than it should be. That's a child whose brain volume is smaller. And it turns out that those kids don't do as well. There's data where people have gone back to Guatemala and they've looked at people enrolled in studies from 30 years ago and found out that stunted children have incomes only 30% those of people who were not stunted. So cognition's terribly important. Obviously, in many cultures, people have to work in the fields and they don't have time to spend as much time with their kids as they'd like to and things like that. What are the results of some of the influences that we see on cognition, and what can we do to prevent adverse cognitive outcomes? So I would see those as being things that we're going to work on. We're going to continue to pursue these novel findings, obviously. We'd like to work with as many partners as we can where we can do so productively, and in particular, we'd like to work with the other innovation labs in terms of providing nutrition expertise. And so, with that, thank you very much.